The grand rotunda of the High Synod of Xylos was a place where silence was not merely an absence of sound, but a heavy, curated commodity, purchased with the blood of lesser species, and maintained by the hum of zero-point stabilizers. The walls were hewn from single slabs of iridescent geode, towering miles into the artificial atmosphere of the station, reflecting the gathered counselors in fractured, shimmering distortions that made them appear as gods rather than politicians. Here in the heart of the golden sector, reality was manicured. There was no dust. There was no decay. There was only the eternal, blinding light of the Zalosian aesthetic, a philosophy that equated symmetry with morality and polish with power. High Exarch Valen sat upon the gravity throne, his elongated fingers drumming a nervous, staccato rhythm against the armrest, a sound that seemed to echo with undue violence in the vast stillness. He was a creature of refined elegance, his chitinous armor inlaid with circuitry of gold and platinum, his face a mask of pale, translucent skin that betrayed the violet pulse of the veins beneath. He was the architect of the piece of glass, a 1,000-year era where the ugly, the broken, and the chaotic were exiled to the rim, leaving the core worlds in a state of stagnant perfection. But the screens floating in the center of the rotunda, massive projections of hard light, showed something that violated every tenet of their civilization. It was an anomaly, a scar on the velvet skin of the void. Fleet Admiral Kalen, a warrior whose armor was so polished it acted as a mirror for the Exarch's own anxiety, stood at the base of the throne, his posture rigid, his mandibles tight against his throat. He did not want to look at the screen, but he had no choice. The sensors of the perimeter monitoring stations had picked it up 3 standard cycles ago, a ghost in the machine, a shadow that moved with a lethargy that mocked the laws of propulsion. It was not a ship, not in any sense that the Zalosian engineers would recognize. It was a mountain of refuse. It was a chaotic accretion of metal, ceramic, and composite, a jagged, asymmetric horror that tumbled through the dark like a grand mistake. It had no sleek lines, no warped nacelles glowing with the clean blue of antimatter, no heraldry painted on pristine hull plating. It was a patchwork leviathan, a monstrosity stitched together from the corpses of 1,000 dead vessels, welded into a shape that defied geometry. "It is an affront," Valen whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disgust and a primal, inexplicable fear. "It is a flying landfill. Why have the automated defense grids not vaporized it? Why does it persist in my sight?" The Exarch's question hung in the air, heavy with the threat of execution for whoever dared to answer with bad news. The gathered counselors, representing the 12 pillars of the hegemony, shifted in their hovering pods, their robes rustling like dry leaves. They were accustomed to threats from the remnant warlords or the occasional uprising of the mining castes, but those were conflicts fought with recognizable weapons, with ships that followed the rules of engagement. This thing on the screen was different. It was vast, its mass eclipsing the readouts, a dense knot of matter that pulled at the local gravity wells with the hunger of a small moon. Admiral Kalen cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stones. "High Exarch," he began, his voice measured, trying to inject rationality into a situation that felt like a descent into madness. "The defense grids have fired." The perimeter stations unleashed a barrage of kinetic penetrators and plasma lances sufficient to glass a planetary continent. The target absorbed it. The word hung there, impossible and heavy. Valen leaned forward, the lights of the rotunda dimming in response to his rising stress levels. "Absorbed? You speak as if it fed upon the destruction." Kalen nodded, a slow, grim gesture. "The telemetry is nonsensical, Exarch. The vessel, if we can dignify it with such a title, does not utilize energy shields. It has no deflection fields. It simply has mass. Layers upon layers of ablative armor wreckage, compressed hull plating from eras we believed lost to history. When our plasma strikes it, the heat is dissipated through vast, liquid cooling networks that run through the garbage like veins. When kinetics hit, the outer layers shatter, but the debris is caught by magnetic fields and pulled back into the hull. It heals itself with its own broken skin. It creates a cloud of shrapnel that acts as a buffer. It is not fighting us, Exarch, it is ignoring us." A ripple of unease moved through the council. To be fought was to be acknowledged. To be ignored was an existential insult to a species that believed itself the apex of creation. Counselor Threx, a being of fluid dynamics encased in a containment suit, floated his pod forward. "Who pilots such a monster?" "Osity?" Threx asked, his synthesized voice vibrating the air. "Is it an automated scow, a relic of the precursor wars gone rogue? Surely no sentient biological life could endure the radiation leaking from that thing. The sensors indicate its reactor core is unshielded, a churning pit of fission and fusion that should cook any crew within seconds." Kalen tapped a command into his datapad and the main screen shifted, zooming in on the jagged flank of the intruder. There were lights. Not the uniform, cold LEDs of the hegemony, but warm, flickering glows. Yellows, oranges, deep reds, they shone from viewports that were mismatched, some round, some square, some merely jagged holes filled with transparent aluminum. "We have detected biosigns," Kalen admitted, his tone dropping to a whisper. "But they are faint, buried deep within the strata of junk, and they are hailing us." "Hailing," Valen recoiled as if the word were a physical blow. "We accepted a transmission from that disease vector. We had to exarch. Protocol dictates that before the Grand Fleet is mobilized for a total purge, we must attempt communication. The signal is primitive, analog radio waves heavily distorted by background static and the sheer magnetic noise of their own hull. It is audio only." Valen waved a hand, a gesture of weary permission. "Play it. Let us hear the wailing of the scavengers before we obliterate them." The audio filled the chamber. It was not wailing. It was not the screeching of barbarians or the mechanical drone of a rogue AI. It was a sound of industry. In the background, there was the heavy thrum of machinery, the clang of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, and the low, rhythmic beating of a heart that sounded like a piston. And then a voice. It was deep, raspy, textured with the weariness of 1,000 years, yet possessed of a calm that was more terrifying than any threat. "This is the heavy salvage vessel Ethelgard," the voice spoke, the language a rough dialect of the trade tongue that sounded archaic and clumsy. "We are passing through the gilded void on a trajectory for the Galactic Rim. We mean no harm, but we will not turn aside. Your warning shots have been catalogued as navigational hazards. We suggest you cease fire to conserve your ammunition. You will need it. We are not the threat. We are the shield that walks. We request passage to the abyssal gate. Over." The transmission cut with a sharp crack of static, leaving the silence of the rotunda deeper than before. Valen stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process the insolence. "They catalogued our orbital bombardment as a navigational hazard," he whispered. "They treat our wrath as bad weather. They called themselves Ethelgard," Threx mused, his fluid form swirling with curiosity. "And they mentioned the abyssal gate. That structure has been dormant for 10,000 cycles. Leads to the dead zones, to the dark space between galaxies where no light shines. Why would they go there?" "Because they are trash," Valen spat, regaining his composure through sheer indignation. "And trash seeks the gutter. Admiral Kalen, I do not care about their warnings. I do not care about their shields of garbage. Mobilize the First Fleet. The Sovereign's Light Asterisk, the Purifier Asterisk, and the Hammer of Dawn Asterisk. Intercept them. Board them if you must, but destroy that eyesore. I will not have the purity of our space defiled by a flying junkyard." Kalen saluted, fist to chest, but his eyes remained troubled. He had seen the sensor readings. He had seen the density of that ship. It was not just junk. It was dense matter. It was a planetoid of steel and will. And the voice? The voice had sounded like a parent speaking to a petulant child. The mobilization of the First Fleet was a spectacle of light and choreography. From the orbital shipyards of Xylos, the great cruisers detached from their moorings, their hulls gleaming white and gold, their engines flaring with the blue purity of antimatter. They were beautiful ships, designed as much for parades as for war. They moved in perfect formation, a geometric lattice of power that swept through the void toward the intruder. On the bridge of the Asterisk Sovereign's Light Asterisk, Kalen watched the tactical plot. The Ethelgard had not deviated. It plodded forward, a slow, ugly stain on the starfield. It was enormous, easily 10 times the mass of his flagship, but its silhouette was a nightmare of jagged edges. Sensors showed cranes, magnetic grapples, and vast intake funnels jutting from the hull like the limbs of a dead insect. It looked less like a ship and more like a city that had been crushed into a ball. "Target enters optimal firing range in 30 seconds, the tactical officer announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Admiral, their energy output is spiking, but it's not weapons, it's engines. No, it's life support. Their life support draws more power than our main batteries." Kalen frowned. "Explode. And the ship is leaking heat, Admiral. It's inefficient, the sheer volume of atmosphere inside. They must be maintaining an ecosystem. I'm reading humidity levels, nitrogen cycles. It's a biosphere encased in scrap metal." "Hail them one last time," Kalen ordered. "Tell them to power down and prepare to be boarded. If they refuse, target their propulsion if you can find it." The channel opened. "Unidentified vessel Asterisk Ethelgard, this is Fleet Admiral Kalen of the Hegemony. You are in violation of our borders. Power down your engines and prepare for inspection. Compliance is mandatory." The response was immediate, lacking the delay one would expect from such a primitive rig. "Admiral Kalen, this is Captain Hannon of the Ethelgard. We cannot power down. Our engines are the heart of the ship. To stop them is to kill the colony. We are continuing on our vector. We advise you to stand clear. Your sensors are blinding you to the wake we leave behind." "We are not blind," Kalen snapped. "Fire warning shots across their bow, close proximity." The Sovereign's light shuddered as its forward railguns discharged. Two massive slugs of tungsten, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, streaked toward the junk ship. They were aimed to miss by kilometers, a show of force. But the Ethelgard did not flinch. Instead, a section of its hull, a rusted conglomeration of what looked like cargo containers and ancient satellite dishes, shifted. A magnetic field of terrifying intensity erupted from the ship, not a shield but a tractor beam of immense power. It caught the tungsten slugs. It did not deflect them. It caught them. The massive projectiles slowed, suspended in the void, caught in a web of gravity manipulation that shouldn't have been possible with such crude tech. Then slowly the Ethelgard reeled them in. The slugs drifted toward the hull, where a grinding maw of mechanical teeth opened up. The ship ate the bullets. They salvaged the ammunition," the tactical officer whispered, her face pale. "Metal content analyzed, resources acquired," a synthesized voice from the Ethelgard broadcasted on an open channel. "Thank you for the donation. High-grade tungsten is rare in this sector. Proceeding." Kalen felt a cold sweat break out under his carapace. They hadn't blocked the shot, they had harvested it. This was not warfare, this was recycling. "All ships," Kalen roared, panic finally cracking his veneer of discipline. "Full spread, target the center of mass, vaporize them." The first fleet erupted. Beams of coherent light, plasma torpedoes, and antimatter warheads poured into the void, a river of destruction aimed at the floating mountain. The Ethelgard disappeared behind a wall of explosions. The silence of space was filled with the blinding flash of the assault. For a full minute, the hegemony fleet poured its wrath into the target. Valen, watching from the throne room, smiled. Nothing could survive that. Perfection always triumphed over chaos. When the smoke of the plasma dispersion cleared, the smile froze on Valen's face. The Ethelgard was still there. It was glowing red in places, parts of its outer shell slagged and dripping molten metal into the void, but the mass remained. As the sensors cleared, Kalen saw what was happening. The ship was shedding its skin. The outer layer of junk, the loose debris, the ablative plates, had absorbed the thermal shock and was now being jettisoned, revealing a second layer beneath. And this layer was not junk. It was dark, matte, and scarred, but it was solid. It was a hull made of a material the sensors couldn't identify, a dense weave of carbon nanotubes and neutron-degenerate matter. The junk was just the packaging. The real ship was the indestructible core inside. "Damage report," Captain Hannon's voice came over the comms, sounding bored. "Outer ablative shell at 40%. Thermal reserves at capacity. We have enough heat now to run the forge for a month. Thanks for the top-up, Admiral. Now if you're done throwing tantrums, we have work to do, and so do you." Kalen stared at the screen. "What work? You are intruders." "Look behind you, Admiral," Hannon said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. "You were so busy looking at the trash that you didn't see the shadow that was following it. We didn't come here to invade you. We came here because we are being chased, and we brought the bait." Kalen spun his command chair around. The rear sensors, previously focused on the Ethelgard, swept the empty space behind the fleet. At first, there was nothing. Then the stars began to go out. It was not a ship. It was an absence, a void within the void. A tear in the fabric of reality that was widening, consuming the light of the distant nebula. "We call them the entropy eaters," Hannon explained, his voice echoing in the bridge of every ship in the hegemony fleet. "They feed on high-energy states. They feed on order. Why feed on perfection? Your fleet, Admiral. Your beautiful, glowing, pristine fleet. To them you look like a banquet. We look like indigestion. That's why we survive. And that's why we're the only ones who can save you." The realization hit Kalen with the force of a physical blow. The aesthetic perfection of the hegemony, their obsession with clean energy and pure lines, made them the perfect prey for a predator that hunted order. The Ethelgard, with its chaos, its noise, its inefficiency, was invisible to the beast, or at least undesirable. The junk ship was a camouflage suit, and the hegemony was standing naked in the spotlight. "They are breaching the manifold," the tactical officer screamed as alarms erupted across the console. "Hyperspace rupture detected, multiple contacts. They're everywhere." From the tier in space, they emerged. They were crystalline, angular, terrifyingly beautiful entities of pure energy and hard light. They looked like the idealized forms the hegemony worshipped, but twisted into predatory shapes. They moved with instant acceleration, ignoring inertia. The first hegemony cruiser, the Dawn's Edge, didn't even have time to raise shields. The entities passed through it, and the ship simply ceased to function. Its energy was drained instantly, the crew frozen, the reactor cold. The ship drifted, a dead husk. Then the entities turned toward the flagship. "We cannot fight them," Kalen yelled. Our weapons pass through them, they are absorbing our fire. Correct, Hannon's voice interjected. You can't fight entropy with order, you have to fight it with chaos. Admiral, get your fleet behind us. Now, Kalen hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The pride of the hegemony crumbled before the reality of imminent death. All ships, fall back, form up in the wake of the Guard. Use them as cover. The pristine white ships broke formation, fleeing in a chaotic route toward the mountain of junk they had just tried to destroy. The Guard did not flee, it rotated. The massive cranes and magnetic grapples swung outward. Vents along the hull opened, spewing thick, opaque clouds of ionized gas and metallic particulate smoke. A ship in space making smoke. It was absurd. It was genius. The cloud spread rapidly, creating a nebula of interference. The crystalline entities slowed, their sensors confused by the chaotic medium. And then the Guard roared. It wasn't a sound in the vacuum, but a broadcast of pure electronic noise, a scream of static that jammed every frequency across the spectrum. The humans were weaponizing noise. Inside the Guard, the atmosphere was very different from the sterile bridges of the hegemony. Captain Silas Hannon stood on the command deck, which looked more like a factory floor than a bridge. Cables hung from the ceiling, sparking occasionally. The air smelled of ozone, coffee, and sweat. The crew were not uniformed officers, but engineers in exosuits, their hands stained with grease. Reactors at 110%, shouted Chief Engineer Marla from a pit of monitors. The probability drive is spun up. We're generating enough chaotic data to blind a god. Hannon nodded, lighting a cigar, an archaic habit for an archaic man. Good. Let's show these crystal freaks what humanity is made of. Deploy the harpoons. On the hull of the Guard, massive magnetic cannons fired. They didn't fire energy, they fired physical anchors, miles of reinforced carbon chain cables attached to massive hooks. The hooks slammed into the crystalline entities. Physics argued that the energy beings shouldn't be touchable, but the humans had cheated. The hooks were coated in a resonance field that solidified the energy on contact. The beast screeched, a psychic sound that bled into the minds of everyone in the sector as they were tethered. Reel them in, Hannon ordered. Feed them to the furnace. The Guard was not just a ship, it was a metabolic engine. It dragged the struggling energy beings toward its maw. The same grinders that had eaten the tungsten slugs now chewed on the cosmic horrors. The energy released was blinding, but the Guard *S capacitors absorbed it, channeling the raw power into its own shielding. They are eating the monsters, Valen whispered from his throne, watching the battle unfold on his screens. The horror was replaced by a profound confusion. The humans were brutal, dirty, and utterly effective. They did not duel, they brawled. They turned the battlefield into a construction site, dismantling the enemy with industrial efficiency. The hegemony fleet, hiding behind the bulk of the junk ship, fired support shots, but they were insignificant compared to the grappling match occurring in the center. The Guard took damage. Explosions ripped through its outer layers. Entire sections of the junk city were sheared off, spilling atmosphere and debris into the dark. But for every piece lost, the ship seemed to grow harder, the inner core glowing with the stolen energy of the enemy. After an hour of carnage, the rift began to close. The entropy eaters, realizing they were losing biomass to this scavenger, retreated. They were not defeated, but they were denied. They slipped back into the dark dimensions, leaving the sector littered with the wreckage of the battle. The Guard hung in the void, smoking, battered, surrounded by a cloud of its own blood, metal, and gas. But it was alive. Silence returned to the sector, but it was different now. It was not the curated silence of the hegemony. It was the heavy, exhausted silence of survival. A shuttle detached from the Guard. It was a boxy, ugly brick of a craft, painted with hazard stripes. It flew toward the Sovereign's light asterisk. Permission to come aboard, Admiral? Hannon's voice was tired. We need to talk about the rent. Protecting your shiny asses wasn't free. Admiral Kalen met the human delegation in the hangar bay. He had expected brutes. He had expected giants. What walked down the ramp were humans of average height, wearing patched flight suits covered in pockets and tools. Captain Hannon was an older man, his face a roadmap of scars and wrinkles, his eyes sharp and gray. He walked with a limp, supported by a cane that looked like it was made from a strut of a destroyed fighter. He looked around the pristine, white hangar of the hegemony flagship and grimaced. Too clean, he muttered. No character, how do you people find anything without a bit of clutter? Kalen stepped forward, flanked by his honor guard. He towered over the human, but he felt small. Captain Hannon, Kalen said, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of immense respect he had never offered a non-Zalosian. You saved us, the nature of your vessel. It is beyond our comprehension. Hannon shrugged. It's not complicated, Admiral. It's a ship made of mistakes. We learned from every crash, every explosion, every failed civilization we found in the drift. We don't throw things away. We integrate them. That hull plating, that's from the ruins of the Velosian Empire. That engine core, salvaged from a supernova remnant. We are the memory of the galaxy, you people. You try to be perfect, but the universe hates perfection. Perfection is static, it's dead. Life is messy, life is junk. The elevator ride to the meeting room was tense. Hannon touched the walls, leaving greasy fingerprints on the immaculate white panels. The hegemony officers flinched but said nothing. In the conference room they sat. Hannon placed his boots on the table. "Here's the deal," Hannon said, leaning back. "Those things, the eaters, they're not gone. They're just hungry, and you are the tastiest thing in the sector. You're bright, you're loud, and you're soft." "Soft," Valen's hologram projected into the room, his voice indignant. "We are the hegemony. We command the stars." "You command a garden," Hannon corrected. "And the wolves just found the fence. You need walls, rough, ugly, strong walls. You need us." "You propose an alliance?" Kalen asked. "I propose a contract," Hannon smiled, revealing teeth that were not perfectly straight. "We will build you a shell. We will teach you how to be ugly. We will teach you how to build ships that don't shatter when you hit them with a rock. In exchange, we want access to your data cores. Specifically the archives of the precursors." The room went cold. The precursor archives were sacred, forbidden. "Why?" Valen demanded. "What could scavengers want with the holy texts?" Hannon's expression shifted. The roguish pirate vanished, replaced by a scholar of infinite sorrow. "Because we aren't just collecting metal, Exarch, we're collecting the pieces of the puzzle, the signal." Hannon tapped the table, and a hologram sprang up from his wrist projector. It was a map of the galaxy, but it was covered in red lines, connecting dead worlds, ruined stars, and black holes. "The universe is breaking down," Hannon said softly. "Entropy is accelerating. The eaters are just the symptoms. The disease is the structure of space-time itself. It's rotting. We found a message in the static of the Big Bang, a blueprint, a repair manual." Kalen stared at the map. You believe you can fix the universe?" "We're engineers," Hannon said. "We fix things." "That's what we do. We don't care about politics or religion or aesthetics. We care that the engine is knocking. We've been building the Ethelgard not just as a ship, but as a component, a patch. But we're missing the code to run it. You have the code in your archives. You've been sitting on the salvation of reality and using it as a religious prop." The accusation hung in the air. Valen looked at the dirty, exhausted human. He looked at the asterisk Ethelgard on his screen, the ugly lump of iron that had stood against the void. He realized then that his entire civilization was a facade. They were children playing. In a sandbox while the tide was coming in, the humans were the adults building the dike. "If we give you the archives," Valen said slowly, "will you stay? Will you stand between us and the dark?" "We are the dark," Hannon said. "We are the dirt. You need the dirt to grow the flower. Yes, we'll stay. But things are going to change around here. No more polished floors. You're going to get your hands dirty." The weeks that followed were a culture shock that shook the hegemony to its core. The Ethelgard docked with the great orbital ring of Xylos. It was like a tumor attaching itself to a pearl, but from the tumor flowed life. Human engineers flooded the station. They were loud, they played music that sounded like crashing machinery, and they laughed with abandon that terrified the reserved aliens. They began to modify the hegemony fleet. They bolted ablative armor onto the sleek cruisers. They tore out the delicate, high-efficiency sensor arrays and replaced them with robust, redundant LiDAR systems. They installed physical projectile weapons, railguns and flak cannons next to the plasma lances. To the Zalosians, it was desecration. To the humans, it was up-armoring. Diplomat Lyra, a Zalosian of the scholar caste, spent her time on the Ethelgard. She was fascinated by the humans. She walked the corridors of the junk ship, amazed by the sheer density of history. Every bulkhead had a story. Every pipe was stamped with the serial number of a different dead civilization. She realized the ship was a tomb, but a tomb that walked. It was a monument to the stubbornness of life. She found Hannon in the Arboretum, a massive dome in the center of the ship where plants from 1,000 worlds grew in a chaotic jungle. "Captain," Lyra said, her voice soft, "I have translated the precursor data. It matches your signal." Hannon looked up from a data pad. He looked tired, and "It is a frequency," Lyra said. "A resonance key if broadcast through a sufficiently large amplifier. It could stabilize the local vacuum energy. It would create a barrier against the entropy eaters. It would heal the rift." She paused. "But the Ethelgard, the ship is the amplifier, isn't it? That's why you built it so dense. That's why it's so massive. It's a tuning fork." Hannon nodded. "Smart girl, yes, the ship is the key, but turning the key. It's going to ring the bell, and when the bell rings, the ship might not hold together." Lyra's eyes widened. "You mean to sacrifice the vessel, your home?" "It's made of junk, Lyra," Hannon smiled sadly. "It was always meant to be used up. That's the nature of things. You use them until they break, and then you build something new. We aren't trying to live forever. We're trying to make sure ** you can." The attack came 3 days later. The entropy eaters returned, not as a hunting pack, but as an invasion force. The sky tore open across the entire sector. Thousands of crystalline entities poured out, screaming their psychic song of oblivion. The hegemony fleet, now scarred and bolted with human scrap, met them. This time they did not break. The railguns thundered, shattering the crystal forms. The ablative armor held, absorbing the energy lashes. Kalen, commanding from the bridge of the Asterisk Sovereign's light Asterisk, now renamed the Asterisk Iron Sovereign Asterisk, fought with a savagery he had learned from Hanan. "Hold the line," he roared. "Protect the Ethelgard, buy them time." The Ethelgard moved to the center of the rift. It was taking a beating. The entities swarmed it like wasps on a hive. Explosions blossomed across its surface, tearing away the outer layers of history. The museum was burning. Inside, the humans worked with the frantic calm of professionals. "Reactors to critical," Hanan ordered. "Initiate the resonance sequence. Feed the precursor code into the main deflector dish." "Hull integrity at 20%, Marla screamed. "We're losing structural cohesion. The vibration is tearing us apart." "Hold it together," Hanan yelled, gripping the console. "Just a little longer, let it ring." A sound began to build. It was felt rather than heard. A deep, thrumming vibration that rattled the teeth of every being in the system. The Ethelgard began to glow, not with the red of heat, but with a pure white light. The junk began to resonate. The iron, the steel, the carbon, the gold, every piece of scrap from every dead world began to sing in unison. It was the song of the galaxy. It was the defiant scream of matter against the void. The signal blasted outward. It washed over the enemy fleet. The entropy eaters froze. The chaotic frequency of the Asterisk Ethelgard was the antithesis of their existence. It was the sound of reality asserting itself. They shattered. Thousands of them cracked and dissolved into harmless radiation. The rift, the great wound in the sky, began to stitch itself shut, pulled together by the gravity of the signal. But the Ethelgard could not withstand the force of its own S. Ong, the massive ship, groaned. Metal shrieked. "Abandon ship," Hanan's voice came over the fleet comms. "All hands get to the pods, she's cracking." "Captain," Kalen shouted, "get out of there." "Someone has to hold the button down, Admiral." Hanan's voice was filled with a manic joy. "It's been an honor, remember us, don't let the galaxy get too clean." The Ethelgard exploded. It was not a destructive explosion, but a transformative one. The ship disintegrated into a cloud of glittering dust, a nebula of metal and memory that expanded to fill the space where the rift had been. The cloud glowed with a soft, golden light. The rift was sealed. The enemy was gone. The ship made of junk had become a star. Silence returned to the Hall of Echoes, but it was a different silence. Valen stood at the window, looking up at the new nebula that hung in the sky. They called it Hanan's Forge. It was ugly. It was asymmetrical. It was beautiful. Admiral Kalen stood beside him. The Admiral's armor was scratched. He had not polished it. "We have received the survivors," Kalen said softly. "Over 3,000 humans. They are mourning, but they are also working. They have already begun to salvage the wreckage of the battle." Valen nodded. "Let them work. Give them whatever they need. Give them the shipyards." "Exarch?" Kalen asked, surprised. "You would let the scavengers run the royal shipyards." Valen turned, his eyes reflecting the chaotic light of the new nebula. "We spent 1,000 years trying to be perfect, Kalen, and we nearly died of it. These humans. They built a god out of garbage. They turned refuse into salvation. We were the junk, Kalen, useless, pretty junk. They were the architects." He looked back at the sky. "Let them build. I want to see what they make next. And Kalen." "Yes, Exarch. Do not polish your armor, the scratches. They tell a story." "I think it is time we started having a history again." The galaxy had changed. The nightmare of the aesthetic purists had come true. The clean lines were gone, replaced by the rugged, bolted-together reality of survival. The humans, the calm, logical, ethical scavengers, had not conquered the hegemony. They had reforged it. They had shown that the strength of a civilization was not in how shiny its hull was, but in how much damage it could take and keep flying. The Ethelgard was gone, but its philosophy remained. In the shipyards, human and alien engineers worked side by side, welding plates of different alloys together, laughing as sparks showered down like rain. They were building a new fleet. It would be ugly. It would be a nightmare to look at. And it would be the strongest thing the universe had ever seen. Deep in the void, far beyond the sensor range of the new alliance, a signal drifted. It was faint, carried on the back of the cosmic background radiation. It was not a threat. It was a question. Other eyes, ancient and terrible, had seen the light of Hanan's Forge. They had tasted the resilience of the signal. They turned their gaze away from the golden sector. There was no easy meal there. The junk pile dogs had teeth, and they had learned how to bite back. On the surface of Xylos, in a park that had once been manicured to the millimeter, a human child sat in the dirt, playing with a broken piece of machinery. A Xylosian child, tall and spindly, watched with curiosity. Slowly, the alien child sat down in the mud. He reached out a long finger and touched the gear. "Broken?" the alien asked. The human child smiled, wiping grease on his forehead. "Not broken," he said, handing the gear to his new friend. "Spare part, we can fix it." And together in the mud, under the light of the scavenger's star, they began to build. The end of the Ethelgard was the beginning of the Terran-Zalosian Concordat, a union of elegance and endurance. The galaxy was vast, and it was dark, and it was full of monsters. But for the first time in eons, the monsters were afraid. They feared the ships that looked like debris. They feared the silence that wasn't empty. They feared the humans who looked at the end of the world and saw nothing but raw materials. The philosophical shift within the hegemony was not immediate, but it was irreversible. The concept of *wabi-sabi*, the acceptance of transience and imperfection, spread through the alien psyche like a benign virus. Monuments to the perfect forms were not torn down, but they were allowed to weather. Ivy was allowed to grow on the pristine towers. The Council of the Gilded Void renamed itself the Council of the Resilient. And in the center of their great hall, where the hologram of the Ethelgard once floated as a symbol of disgust, there now stood a statue. It was not made of gold or light. It was a rough, welded sculpture of scrap metal depicting a human hand grasping a star. The inscription at the base was simple, translated into 100 galactic languages. From the lost, the found, from the BR. Oaken, the strong. Ambassador Lyra became the bridge between the two species. She documented the human history, their wars, their collapses, their near extinctions. She realized that humanity's superpower was not technology or strength or intelligence. It was trauma. Humans had traumatized themselves so many times, destroyed their own world so many times, that they had developed an immunity to the apocalypse. They were the cockroaches of the cosmos, but cockroaches with souls of poets. She wrote in her memoirs, "We sought to avoid the fall. Humans dive into the abyss and build a ladder on the way down." As the years passed, the junk aesthetic became a badge of honor. High-ranking Zalosian admirals would intentionally weld patches of different colored metals onto their command chairs. To have a ship that looked factory new became a sign of inexperience, of a captain who had never been tested. The nightmare that had arrived at their doorstep had woken them from a dream that was slowly killing them. And out in the deep dark, the Ethelgard *S sacrifice continued to echo. The nebula it created acted as a permanent jammer against the frequencies of the entropy eaters. It was a lighthouse of chaos that kept the shores of reality safe. But some whispered that Hannon was not dead. Some of the salvage crews working the edge of the nebula reported strange readings. Ghost signals on the old analog frequencies. A voice, raspy and tired, humming a tune amidst the static. A sensor ghost of a ship that wasn't there, moving through the clouds of dust, still patrolling, still scavenging, still fixing the engine of the universe, one spare part at a time. The legend of the ghost scavenger grew, giving hope to those lost in the drift. If your ship broke down in the dark, if your life support was failing, if you were alone and dying, you didn't pray to the gods of light. You broadcast on the open channel, you made noise, and sometimes, just sometimes, a shadow would detach itself from the dark, a monstrosity of metal and kindness, and a voice would say, "Need a lift? I think I have a spare part for that." The galaxy was a junkyard, and it was home.